The galaxy was an unending expanse of darkness that was broken up by the faint glow of distant stars. An outpost, an artificial fortress, was located at the center of this void. This station is equipped with state-of-the-art technology to protect vital areas of interstellar territory, and strengthened by its operator's assurance was evidence of the soldiers' steadfast faith in their outpost here. Seclusion was a constant, but so was the assurance of dominance over the unknown, that no force could get past their barriers. The crew, which consisted of enthusiastic recruits and seasoned veterans, worked in smooth rhythm, each activity executed with accuracy and intent. They relied on their system's implicit scanners, scanned the limitless area surrounding them using sensors that were calibrated to identify the system. Their attention was maintained by the slightest anomalous protocols, and there was no room for uncertainty due to operational success, but they were confident. The routine of patrol and upkeep, the germ of complacency, day after day, strengthened their feeling of invincibility, and discussions frequently reverted to stories of previous triumphs in combat, myths that had been handed down and embellished over time against pirates or rogue groups. Time was a reminder of their alleged supremacy, as well as a source of companionship. Their adversaries had always been predictable, with obvious intentions and crude tactics. Outpost was added since it seemed like a haven, but the quiet of space, despite being consoling, it had a way of hiding small indications in the stillness. Occasionally, energy fluctuations danced on their instruments, but were quickly discarded as background noise. Showed up as a brief aberration on the perimeter radar, but it disappeared before the crew could study it. Shrugged it off, in response to false warnings, because they were alone and nothing could reach them unnoticed. Yet a subtle uneasiness started to slink into the background of A. A few staff members whispered to one another about odd sensations throughout their routines when they felt they were being observed. Such ideas were promptly disregarded because they were experts who had been trained to quell unreasonable concerns. These transient uncertainties were obscured by the glare of their screens and the noise of their gear. Even with the assurance that their training and systems had given them, they were unable to ignore the oddities that executed after failing to return. The maintenance drone was discovered later with its circuits mysteriously jumbled in a storage hatch. Secured hours prior to being found, a few jar components appeared to move from their designated locations without explanation. Every event was minor and could be easily attributed to mistakes or oversights. However, it was more difficult to overlook the cumulative effect, and the commander's log captured the crew's impression that there were no anomalies worth looking into or credible threats, so no additional complaints were filed. With careful attention to detail, verifying the station's continued seamless operation. Despite these assurances, there was a simmering air of disquiet that permeated unsaid but noticeable talks in. Each soldier kept their outer appearance, and the meal hall became less cheerful, and there was less laughter, calmness. But their instincts failed them. Even the most logical of them experienced a tingle at the back of their neck, an unexplained feeling that something wasn't quite right, but no proof. There was no concrete evidence to back up these emotions as ours. As the days went by, the strain was barely noticeable and was incorporated into their daily routine. The crew made up for it by more stringent procedure compliance, double-checking systems and making sure all reports were comprehensive. Yet even though they were told not to stop the tiny episodes, it seemed as though something invisible was pushing the boundaries of their awareness. Searching for vulnerabilities in the station's clean hallways, every step reverberated loudly, serving as a reminder of their captivity. The sound of solitude seemed to last longer than it should have, as if the warriors were alive within the nothingness. Despite their resilience, they could not help but feel the weight of their loneliness more keenly. It was a slight change, but unquestionably, even the commander's manner started to convey the strain. He disregarded the crew's worries with authority. Yet, he continued to stare at the surveillance. He went through logs and diagnostics, looking for trends in the data, but nothing definitive came up. A number of unrelated irregularities that didn't appear serious enough to warrant action, yet the problems continued for everyone. Despite their sophisticated technology, the soldiers were unable to overcome their most basic instincts, which made them feel as though they were no longer alone in the void, and was no longer alone in the void's silence. The experiment now sent Abby into an agony of self-pity. Nevertheless, it moved with a precision that was superior to even the most sophisticated stealth technology. Through layers of complex protection, the technology's presence slipped past the outpost sensors. Systems, a person rooted in discipline and mastery, arose from the blind folds of this abnormality, possessing a toolkit of abilities developed for the sole goal of being invisible in plain sight. Unfamiliar with this field, the figure was led by techniques honed over generations rather than technology, purposefully designed to blend in with the shadows and warp perceptions so that there is no indication of their presence. There was still no disruption that may reveal malice, and the figure's strict discipline prevented any errors on their part. Action was evaluated in accordance with a strict set of guidelines that struck a balance between effectiveness and purpose. Entry, where the military used technology, was a masterpiece in taking advantage of vulnerabilities. In order to protect them, the intruder noticed little flaws and cracks that were missed by overconfident timing. Flawless every instant, selected with accuracy to prevent discovery, environmental components turned into instruments. The figure just required comprehension and no advanced equipment to be altered to conceal presence and reroute focus. Of how to use tact and silence as weapons when the soldiers were in action. The intruder flourished in these systems because of its capacity to adapt to new situations. Patrols were blind and materials or layouts were encountered with gaps in fluid improvisation. Opportunities were offered by spots, camera coverage, and regular maintenance schedules, and the figure moved like water, avoiding obstructions and discovering routes where none appeared. They turned static systems into predictable patterns by using technology's limitations against its developers. Exploit psychological manipulation went beyond physical stealth to become an invisible force. Little disturbances sowed doubts in the warriors' minds, little discrepancies that produced a sense of uncertainty with a tool that was a little out of place and a light flicker that the machines missed. But invisible to the naked eye, these seemingly trivial features contributed to the soldiers' uneasiness and increased the stress. Already seething beneath the surface, such techniques are necessary for the intruder. Patience, the capacity to hold off and allow skepticism to grow in spite of the foreign environment. The figure moved with a comprehension that went beyond cultural and technological boundaries. Techniques demonstrated flexibility by utilizing an internalized discipline that did not necessitate reliance on outside tools. Every action, every choice, and every tool was based on an old custom that stressed harmony between the city and people. The figure was a shadow rather than a disturbance to the person and their environment. The outpost's sophisticated technology blends in perfectly with the space's organic rhythms, was predicated on the idea that no force could outsmart its algorithms or construct it. Beyond its bounds, the figure questioned those presumptions using strategies that made such reliance futile. As systems looked for energy changes or metallic signals, the intruder escaped with, ironically, the human aspect is the weakest, and simplicity ensures that no trace would be found. Link in the station's defenses turned as the most important advantage for the figure. The character recognized the need of patience and saw time as an ally rather than a barrier. Moving only when all the circumstances were ideal, every move was planned to guarantee the least amount of risk and a certain degree of accuracy, that no needless movement or activity could be replicated by technology. The intruder was guided by a discipline that flourished in the pauses between moments and could not be hurried. Was a mission characterized by their deliberate acts rather than by conquest or destruction. Were purposeful, not random, and intended to accomplish a particular goal. The figure skill set reflected this concentration, combination of mental clarity and physical mastery that eliminated every possibility of error. Each tool and method had a specific role. Each one was selected based on how well it worked in a particular circumstance. The figure had no extraneous elements or distractions that could endanger the operation, since the soldiers were unable to notice it because of their dependence on routine and technology. The figure flourished in these blind areas, going undetected through the outposts despite the minor changes taking place around them. Systems intended to monitor anomalies in the most protected places detected nothing, while the people who operated them found it difficult to reconcile the statistics in front of them with their rising sense of dread. brilliant orchestration that shows how the greatest strengths can be turned into weaknesses if they are used improperly. The presence of the person was in fact a paradox that existed both inside and outside the outpost's vision. Instead, it was mastery of avoidance, a reluctance to be concerned about detection, rather than invisibility in the strict sense. Potentially happened, but their passing left no proof or mark to warn even the most sophisticated systems. Despite their non-existence, a ghost moving through the real world with intention and accuracy was the principal foundation of the intruder method was observation. Each action was modified to match the situation. In this case, the figure did not rely on overpowering technology or raw force. However, by comprehending and reacting to the surroundings, this capacity to adjust to the situation instead of the intruder was able to get past barriers that would have prevented even the most determined opponents. The figure's actions were devoid of conceit and a miscalculation of the outpost's defenses. Rather, there was an understanding of the system's strengths and shortcomings and a respect for their complexity directed the actions of the figures, making sure that each action recognized the possibility of failure. However, this recognition guaranteed success by striking a balance between assurance and prudence that allowed little space for expectation. Despite their strength, the outpost's complacency and reliance on sophisticated systems made them blind to anything. The figure took advantage of this oversight by utilizing simplicity and ingenuity to get over its limitations, barriers that would have faced a less flexible opponent. This stood in sharp contrast to the strict protocols of the soldiers, a reminder that human beings may still outmaneuver even the most advanced technologies. The exactness of the intruder's techniques upset the station's meticulously planned order, causing the systems to change and shifting the system's balance of priorities back in favor of the soldiers had always depended on. What had begun as a barely noticeable method of control, systems that formerly offered reassurance started to escalate due to abnormalities and now only caused confusion. Alarms did not sound, and pathways that needed to be watched seemed unguarded, and resources necessary for the crew's operations were subtly altered with every disturbance that hit the core of their self-assurance, creating fissures that grew deeper every second. As the troops' abnormalities increased, discovered that protocol required order, but order seemed to be at odds with their own intuition more and more. Unachievable attempts to get stability back exposed more serious problems with automated procedures that were previously necessary. Now that there was no oversight, the crew's focus patterns were being strained and resources were being used. Disturbances were incredibly erratic, making it impossible for a single hypothesis to explain what was occurring. Every idea put out was swiftly demolished by facts that contradicted it, leaving only uncertainty and skepticism. The intruder's calculated plan became apparent. Through the soldiers' annoyance, each action exacerbated their confusion by taking advantage of their reliance on routine and predictability. Their training had equipped them to deal with actual conflicts and real dangers that could be neutralized by force. They encountered an enemy that was invisible and unquantifiable by their means, which was unlike anything they had expected. Tools or restrained by their tactics, this uncertainty favored the intruders, turning the soldiers' strength became weakness when the crew's togetherness started to be undermined by the unpredictability of the disruptions. As they tried to identify and resolve the issues, conflicts arose based on how each soldier understood the circumstances. Where there had been unity, tension arose from divergent and conflicting viewpoints, and fissures started to appear. Every mistake became into a source of annoyance, and each inaction fueled the widening rift. Soldiers who had previously worked as a cohesive unit started acting as separate individuals. Despite their confusion, the soldiers tried to regain control by delving further into their own grasp of the issue. They doubled their efforts, increased monitoring, put in place redundant checks, and kept everyone on high alert. But these actions merely made their reliance on these mechanisms for coordination more vulnerable. They established a stress and their attention to detail did not pay off. The intruder was not aware of their actions. Despite the soldiers' increased efforts, what should have been a show of power went undetected. Merely their increasing despair as their attention shifted to dealing with the soldiers' imminent disruptions failed to recognize the bigger trend that was developing. Their enemy worked with such accuracy and forethought that beyond their responses, and every countermeasure they used was expected to be proven worthless before this asymmetry, and tactic, expanded the distance between the soldiers and their invisible enemies, allowing it to accomplish its goal. Opponent, forcing them into a more reactive position, allowing the intruder to stay a few steps ahead. The crew's sense of hopelessness was made worse, and tensions among the soldiers grew as they struggled with the pressure. Because of their circumstances, charges started to arise, however covertly, as worries about performance and accountability concerns over strategy and leadership exacerbated the mounting anxiety, undermining the chain of command. The unity that had previously been their most valuable resource started to erode due to oppression. Not only had the intruder upset their systems, but they were also suspicious and frustrated, but also their connections, betraying their own confidence and impeding their efforts to develop fresh tactics. The lack of concrete proof made it impossible for the soldiers to completely understand the nature of their enemy. Each strategy they developed was predicated on presumptions that did not adequately address the intruder's actions, remaining mysterious, denying the reality of their predicament. Classification or forecast, this ambiguity paralyzed the soldiers, preventing them from acting confidently, and more dependent on trial and error when their tactics failed. Soldiers continued to try to regain control, but as they did so, the strain on their resources increased. Cover every potential attack angle, but exhaustion started to worsen. The continual attention to detail needed to keep an eye on the situation diminished their efficiency, leaving them physically and mentally exhausted, and contributed less to the outcome of the search. Nor was the error discredited right away. Errors made by mentally weary people increased in frequency, and the results of these mistakes made their problems worse, and the intruder in the meantime displayed no indications that the crew was suffering psychologically as a result of the soldiers' inability to maintain a level of precision. It became clear that as the crisis continued, their morale suffered greatly from the lack of success, and the once unbreakable virgin and peaceful life became miserably dangerous. Their quiet resignation took the place of the confidence that characterized their demeanor, and their sense of loneliness grew, exacerbated by the knowledge that they were up against an adversary they did not understand. The soldiers, used to being the driving force behind any conflict, now found themselves powerless as a result of this change in viewpoint, questioned their identity and sense of mission. Yet in spite of these difficulties, the soldiers persisted and seek solutions. Their will to face the issue stemmed from the same discipline that had originally masked their weaknesses. Yet this resolve by itself was insufficient to get past the exodus. The intricacy of their situation meant that the strategies they used, which worked well in conventional situations, weren't appropriate for counter an adversary who behaved outside of their knowledge. The intruder's capacity to take use of this. He made sure that each attempt the soldiers made would only increase their annoyance, and the cumulative impact of the execution of the outpost, which was formerly a fortification, were completely destabilized by the intruders. Of accuracy and control was suddenly a scene of confusion and unpredictability for the warriors. The intruder had the ability to regain control of their surroundings in spite of their training and technology, transform their systems into liabilities, their strengths into vulnerabilities, and their confidence into uncertainty. This reversal of the function, the soldiers began to doubt not only their circumstances, but also their position within them. Apparent route forward, the soldiers had to decide whether to modify or stick to the tactics that had failed them. This moment of reckoning made them face their own limitations in light of the truth of their circumstances, both as leaders, both individually and collectively. The intruder's influence was felt in every choice they made, even though it was invisible. Given their behavior and the results of their endeavors, the altercation was no longer merely a fight for command of the outpost, but also a test of the soldiers' capacity to face the unknown. The methodical disintegration of the troops' assurance reflected their developing understanding that they were up against a power completely outside of their control. All of their preconceived notions about their enemy had turned out to be false, and the holes in their trailers were echoed by the rest of the fleet. With every unsuccessful attempt to retake control, knowledge grew. The outpost was once a symbol of galactic authority, had turned into a platform for a relentless challenge to their supremacy, and they began to doubt not only the existence of an intruder, but the essence of the invisible power that went against all accepted explanations and disjointed observations. started to coalesce into some sort of understanding through the turmoil, began to appear, but they were very different from what the soldiers had experienced before. To each disturbance, exhibited a methodical approach and exact reasoning that implied a purpose considerably more complex than haphazard sabotage. The intruders' actions were not only tactical, they were meticulously planned, as if they were directed by a higher goal than the immediate pursuit. The soldiers were uneasy due to these disturbances in their sense of contemplation, which highlighted the gap between their techniques and those of their enemy, and as the soldiers assembled the pieces, a picture of the intruder started to take shape. Even though it was a mystery, it soon became clear that the intruder was not a creation of their own universe. The species or technology they had come upon functioned so subtly and precisely that there was no discernible references for human technology and science. The smooth transition into the outpost atmosphere and energy signatures went against every rule. They realized that the intruders' talents indicated that they originated in a field where technology and physics rules differ. Their own research produced conjectural findings regarding the motive and purpose of the intrusions, seemed neither explicitly antagonistic nor merely observant, indicating a complexity that went beyond straightforward dichotomies of adversary or ally. And this uncertainty made it challenging for the soldiers to come up with a coordinated reaction. If the intruders' sole objective was information, their tactics appeared overly drastic. If their objective was destruction, the absence of overt hostility appeared erratic, and the men were abandoned. Considering the likelihood that the intruders' intentions were completely outside their realm of understanding, the investigation of potential or origins led the warriors into uncharted territory, according to historical documents. Although scattered information from their archives suggested phenomena that were somewhat similar to the present, stories of experiences with beings that existed at the nexus of science and myth came back to life, regarded as superstition or misinterpretation by the soldiers who now took pleasure in their reason. Found oneself going over these stories again with a grudging fascination, looking for links that the growing hypothesis was one of an interdimensional presence, an entity that may shed light on their situation, moved between realms with the same ease as the warriors went through space, which would explain. Speculative offered a framework for comprehending the skills of the intruder in the event that they acted on. The soldiers' capacity to get around fortifications and control their surroundings was based on ideas that were alien to their world. While providing some clarity, this insight also became more profound. The soldiers' sense of vulnerability as they faced a foe whose very existence called into question the fundamental presumptions of their knowledge. The theory's ramifications were significant if the intruder was Amatya. The military were battling not just a singular occurrence, but also the possibility of the opening of a bridge between dimensions. A new layer was added by the prospect of a much greater interaction between realms. Inside their brains, the missiles found a structure that was simple for real, more complexity to their circumstances, prompting inquiries regarding the encounter's larger context, in which they witnessed the acts of a single agent, or were they the initial point of contact for a more extensive project? The soldiers were forced to navigate a labyrinth of doubt in the lack of definitive answers, with every move being shadowed by the weight of possible repercussions. Their attention changed from immediate control to a more comprehensive examination of the intruder's movement patterns, the timing of disturbances, and target selection, all recommended a tactic that focused as much on observation as on interaction. Its interaction, punctuated by degrees of separation and problem directly related to the problem. So the intruder's behaviors appeared to test the soldiers' comprehension of the boundaries of their technology and their ability to understand them. Thus, it appeared as if the intruder was charting their answers, collecting information not for its immediate use, but this change in viewpoint, for whatever reason, compelled the soldiers to reevaluate how they initially proceeded. The failure of attempts to stop the invader using traditional methods demonstrated the insufficiency of their techniques. They started looking into different approaches, ones that needed them to consider beyond the limitations of their education, and technological cooperation became crucial as individual endeavors demonstrated inadequate defenses against the intruders. The troops, once fractured, feeling tense and uncertain, they were motivated by the need to stand together against an unknown enemy. The commander, whose power had been weakened by the growing crisis, became a key player in this transition. His capacity to combine the disparate facts and lead the team toward a unified fleet, while the soldiers remained cautious of their possibilities. The change in command provided a crucial advantage in reaction, a sense of direction. They started to view their opponent as a problem that might be overcome rather than an unbeatable force, comprehended and possibly resisted. Even with this enhanced emphasis on the soldiers, failed to strike a balance between their need for quick action and their need for patience, because the intruder was always there. The crew was constantly reminded of their vulnerable situation and under pressure to take decisive action. Yet they learned to control their urges after realizing that making snap decisions could make their vulnerabilities worse. Watch as the intruder watched in an effort to comprehend before acting. This methodical approach indicated a huge shift away from their early reliance on reactive tactics. As their soldiers' comprehension grew, started to identify indications of intent in the interruptions caused by the intruder. Although destabilizing appeared to prevent irreversible harm, this finding indicated a degree of servitude in contrast to the mayhem the intruder had wreaked. Restraint raised the prospect that instead than being primarily damaging, the intruder's goal was to communicate with the soldiers or conduct exploration. Their annoyance led them to consider the possibility that their opponent might not actually be an enemy. A contradiction was created by this possibility. If the intruder wasn't an adversary, then the military role in the encounter was one of negotiation rather than resistance. For to press the attackers, the soldiers would have to bribe the victim with promises of what waited outside, along with promises that would be true to the victim. Since there was no direct interaction, they were dependent on uncertain methods to negotiate such a deal. Inference, reading the intruder's behavior as a means of communication. This process of interpretation, though tense with airy of optimism, was provided by the uncertainty, which implied that the encounter, for all its difficulties, could result in a comprehension that goes beyond their original conflict. The soldiers' attempts to suppress the other's awareness as a result of the events that culminated in perspective completely different from their original strategy changed whether they liked it or not. As a result of the events that culminated in perspective completely different from their original strategy, realizing that their opponent was unlike anything they had changed, their viewpoint from one of confrontation to one of engagement in a more comprehensive framework, the relationship changed as a result of their evolving ways of thinking, as they attempted to strike a balance between their vulnerabilities and potential solutions. Each encounter with the intruder exposed intricacies that called for more than reactive tactics. The soldiers started to respond with a purposeful focus, combining their information and giving priority to activities that matched their comprehension of the intruder's intentions from their prior knowledge. The emphasis on ingenuity and adaptability replaced the use of force and technological dominance. Without assurance, they resorted to cooperation, combining their knowledge to develop a plan that took into consideration differing aspects of their plan's agenda. As they accepted this one goal, the crew's togetherness increased despite the complexities of the circumstance. The cracks that had previously hampered their efforts started to mend, and a renewed sense of unity took their place. Accountability, this unity, went beyond strategic planning and served as a basis for tackling the more general. As a result of their encounter, the troops were no longer only protecting their outpost. Instead, they were representatives of their reality, who had to interpret and react to anything that questioned their method of comprehending existence focused on observables and minimizing assumptions, patterns. By letting go of the drive for quick fixes, they allowed themselves to be discovered in a way that highlighted accuracy and patience. This methodical approach enabled them to reduce the possibility of misunderstandings, making sure their behaviors demonstrated a mix between initiative and care. They understood that their answer would establish the tone for all subsequent communications, a duty that greatly influenced their choices as leaders. They improved their strategy, and the soldiers realized how inadequate their equipment and training were, and that they used their imagination and intuition to fill the gaps in their protocols. Holes in their knowledge, therefore departing from their tried and true approaches, wasn't without difficulties because it required a degree of adaptability that many people were willing to accept, but it also exposed the crew's adaptability and inventiveness in the face of unprecedented conditions. The intruder's behavior, which was still mysterious, started to show signs of discourse. Their gestures, precision, and temperance revealed a purpose that was not totally perceivable. The soldiers' defensive stance was replaced with one of cautious observation as a result of this antagonistic realization. In an effort to find chances for meaningful engagement, they understood that their answer may either intensify the conflict or open the door to a more profound comprehension of a dualism that needed to be carefully navigated. Because of the intricacy of their tactics and the process, the soldiers began to see the intruder as more than just a danger. Their activity's apparent aim suggested a degree of intelligence and intent that reflected their own. Even if there was still doubt about the encounter, the soldiers started to approach since recognition created a sense of respect. The circumstance, with a combination of interest and determination, resolved to confront the task with honor and purpose. Concentration on observation uncovered minute yet important facts regarding the intruder's operational capabilities. Concealed and precisely controlled the surroundings, indicating a mastery of concepts that went beyond the soldiers' knowledge of science and technology. These findings forced the team to reevaluate their presumptions regarding the nature of existence, which extends their viewpoint and raises inquiries regarding the boundaries of their understanding of the encounter's ramifications. Went beyond the soldiers' immediate difficulties at the outpost. Started to reflect on the larger meaning of their encounter, realizing that it was the intruder's presence served as a reminder that the universe is a place where realities collide with tremendous repercussions, was much more complex and linked than they had previously thought. And this knowledge infused their endeavors with a goal that went beyond their original mission, inspiring them to interact with the circumstance as a potential discovery moment. The result of their work was not identified by a conclusive resolution, but through a change in perspective. The soldiers' capacity to adjust and react thoughtfully and respectfully enabled them to negotiate the encounter's intricacies without giving way to hostility or fear. Their success was based on their readiness to accept uncertainty and conduct themselves with integrity, which allowed them to deal with the current issues while creating the foundation for further communication. The experience left a permanent impression on the soldiers, altering their viewpoint and redefining their mission when they leave the service. Have a greater understanding of the complexities of their reality and the opportunities that lie beyond it. Beyond tactical issues, the lessons they learned included lessons about resilience, unity, and EY. As the warriors considered their journey, they realized how important it is to approach the unknown with respect and humility. Acknowledged that their greatest strength was not their training or technology, but rather their capacity for adaptation and endurance. The experience had pushed the boundaries of their knowledge and questioned their presumptions, compelling them to face their weaknesses and adopt a more comprehensive viewpoint. During this process of development and change, became their experience's true legacy, demonstrating their tenacity and aptitude for exploration. The event also served as a reminder of how everything is interconnected, which struck a deep chord with the troops. Understood that their acts bore consequences as they considered the ramifications of their encounter. Weight beyond their current situation, influencing how they interact in interactions that could last for a long period. This realization strengthened their resolve to tackle the unknown with consideration after their mission was over, and making certain that their answers represented the principles they aimed to preserve. The troops went back to their routine with a fresh sense of direction, their actions guided by the knowledge gained from the experience, and they carried with them the awareness that the universe was far more intricate and linked than they had previously thought, and that their journey became a source of inspiration and a reminder that even in the face of, it was feasible to traverse the unknown with integrity in the midst of uncertainty and resolve. Their thoughts on the experience, which emphasized the value of perspective and flexibility in overcoming obstacles, they saw that their capacity to handle the situation's complexity had relied on their capacity to act purposefully and accept ambiguity. Despite being hard, this strategy had given them the opportunity to discover purpose and opportunity in a circumstance that seemed daunting at first.